All right, B-Movie Banter time. Last month we had the star of tonight's feature, Dick Miller, but for this month we went with the Corman protege that has continued to cast Miller over and over again, be it for Gremlins, The Howling, Innerspace, or one of my all-time favorites, The Burbs. Miller has appeared in countless Joe Dante films. Derek, anything to add before we turn it over to Dante's Inferno?
I mean, check out my t-shirt. You're in my world now, Grandma.
Oh, all right. Roll the interview before I get put to sleep.
I want to thank you for taking a few minutes to talk with us today. We really appreciate it.
Okay.
Right off the bat, can you talk about working with brilliant comedic actors like you did with Martin Short in Innerspace? Is he kind of that Robin Williams ilk that you yell action, you just let him go, or does he kind of adhere closely to the script?
Well, let's just say that if you do 10 takes with him, the 10th take will be so unlike the first take that you'll be wondering whether you're making the same movie. He's a brilliant improvisational comedian. However, he was very good about the script because it was a pretty good script, and what he liked to do was to embellish. And so it's a little harder on other actors because, an actor who's at his best on take 10 may be in a scene with an actor who's kind of pooped by take 5. And so there's a certain amount of cajoling that you have to do to keep everybody happy. But I have to tell you, that was one of the most fun sets that I've ever been on. I mean, it was a joy to go to work every day.
And speaking of improv, I've read a couple of times that Hoyt Axton, who played Billy's father in Gremlins, improved nearly all of his lines in that 1984 classic. Is that accurate? Did he do that?
Well, I wouldn't say all of his lines, but I would say that a great deal of the character that's on the screen came from Hoyt. When it was, it was written as the sort of standard sitcom father. And once Hoyt came in with his folksy charm, of course, the character, changed as well. And he did ad-lib a lot of funny stuff, and most of it's in the movie.
While on the topic of Gremlins, it's been more than 3 decades since that movie came out. It's still wildly popular, though. How does it feel to have created something with that kind of lasting impact?
It's great. Look, I mean, you're lucky to get one of those in a career. I mean, it's a movie that's like a complete unexpected hit that nobody thought anything about while they were making. They didn't have any expectations. And it suddenly came out at the right time, and all of a sudden became a phenomenon. And much beyond the rather small cost that it took to make it. And it was, I refer to it as a medley of my hit.
When it comes to child actors, some go on to long, successful careers while others fade quickly. You directed Ethan Hawke and River Phoenix on Explorers, and of course, Phoenix left us much sooner than he should have, but he did leave a lasting impression. When it comes to younger actors like that, do you see something special in some of them right off the bat that separates them from the field?
Well, child actors are very hard to cast because if you do your job correctly, you don't have to do a lot of direction. But there are a lot of kids, at least there used to be, I'm sure there still are, who have learned a lot of bad habits from doing TV shows and cutesy tricks that always worked for certain kinds of audiences, and there's a falsity to it. If you can find a kid who can be himself convincingly, then you've got it made. And when it comes to people like Ethan Hawke, Ethan wasn't even an actor. He just accompanied another kid to a reading. And I thought he was, interesting looking. He had big braces, and he was very charming and a little clumsy. And we said, well, let's see if he can, let's have a read. And so he read, and he ended up getting the lead in a Paramount picture over lots and lots of seasoned kids who'd been in the movies for years.
Mm-hmm. Are you surprised at all then to see the big star that he's become all these years later?
No, not at all. He was innately talented from the very get-go. He picked it up so quickly that the people on the crew were remarking that they couldn't believe that this kid was a non-pro.
Wow. You've cast several actors over and over, including Robert Picardo and Wendy Shaw, but our B-Movie Banter guest from last month was actually Dick Miller. So what qualities does Miller possess to keep you bringing him back time and again?
He's fun to watch, and I was a fan. I was a fan before I came to Hollywood, and when I made my first movie, which I thought might be my only movie, I thought, I gotta have Dick Miller in it, and we hit it off, and he ended up in the position of being sort of a talisman for most of my movies. I mean, almost every feature I've ever done, he's been in, and the ones he isn't, he was usually edited out of.
All right, it has to be said, Dick Miller was in this as well. The Burbs, it's one of my favorite films of all time. For as many quotable scenes as that movie has, What's the one that always jumps out to you when you start thinking about making that movie?
Well, that was again. I mean, next to Innerspace, that was the most fun movie that I ever made, and partly it was because there was a writer's strike, and we, in order to try to lend some spontaneity to the script, we decided to shoot it in sequence so that if the actors wanted to ad lib or create some new direction for their characters, it would still work because we wouldn't have shot the rest of the movie. And so a great deal of the movie ended up being ad-libbed, and not that it wasn't a good script, because it was, but because it was a great situation. But the mix of characters that when you cast a bunch of actors, there's an ensemble quality to it, and when you cast the right ones, it's just heaven to watch them work. And in this case, everything was copacetic, and the characters just leapt right off the screen, and for some reason, even though the picture was not exactly warmly received when it was new, it's become a sort of a cult classic.
Working with Tom Hanks in that movie, it's clear that he was a popular, talented actor at the time, but in the late 80s, he was primarily making comedies and whatnot. Did you have any inkling at all that he'd go on to be one of the most accomplished dramatic actors in cinematic history?
Well, he really impressed me as a dramatic actor in the Burbs. I mean, there's a scene where he, at the end of the picture, where he freaks out and yells at everybody, which is pretty dramatic, although funny. He was a dream to work with, and he was at a point in his career where he knew that he was in a transition, and he sort of fought against having a kid in the movie. He didn't really want to become. He didn't want to go over that career hump where he goes from leading man to family man. And we managed to convince him that it was important for the story to do that, and so he did it. But I think but he had just shot Big, but it hadn't come out yet. And in fact, I remember him leaving the set to go to the premiere of the picture while we were shooting. And that, I think, is the picture that really put him on the map. I mean, Splash was, he made a good impression in Splash, but Big was the movie that really made people say, hey, this guy's actually a leading man movie star.
Some folks may not be aware of the chimpanzee who wrought havoc on the set of The Burbs. Can you talk about that a little bit? A couple of stories about Bubbles?
Bubbles. Well, I didn't spend a lot of face time with Bubbles.
Yeah.
He was usually in Corey Feldman's trailer. But Corey was friends with Michael Jackson, and every so often Bubbles would be visiting. And he had a habit of defecating all over Corey's trailer, which did not endear him to the crew. And after a while, Bubbles became persona non grata, and he was more or less barred from the set.
All right, can you tell us about Burying the X, the new film you'll have coming out soon?
Yes, this is a zomcom, which is a zombie comedy for those of you who aren't initiated. About Anton Yelchin plays this a guy who's got this very hot, sexy girlfriend, Ashley Green, who is not very controlling and is really pretty much running his life, and he's kind of henpecked. And he really would he'd like to break up with her, but he doesn't want to hurt her feelings, and so he stays with her. And then she has a terrible accident. She dies, and he's devastated because he feels responsible. And then he meets another girl, Alexandra Daddario, who is very much more on his wavelength. But the problem is that his ex comes back. She's a zombie now, and he really can't get rid of her because she can't die.
So is there any kind of a release date set for that yet, or when's that coming out?
I'm still cutting it, actually, and
Okay.
we shot it in 20 days in Hollywood, which is unusual because most movies aren't made in Hollywood anymore. And we've had some screenings that have been pretty successful, and I think they're off in Berlin right now trying to sell foreign rights.
All right.
So I'm not quite sure who's going to handle it here.
All right, well, Joe Dante, it's been a thrill talking to you. Thanks so much for speaking with us today.
No, my pleasure.